Part 1. The drowning silence. The rain was an absolute, cold sheet, drumming a relentless rhythm on the asphalt. Not the dry, dusty heat of a Colorado highway, but the damp, suffocating green of coastal Washington state. I stood there, drenched in the downpour, squinting through the miserable curtain of water at the empty spot where the car had been just 10 minutes ago. Our silver sedan, my ticket home, my entire life gone. Olivia and her friends, Amelia, Isla, and Grace, vanished. At first, I told myself it was one of their stupid games. They were always doing this, weren't they? Pushing boundaries, testing the tensile strength of my patience, trying to see how far they could stretch me before I snapped. 5 years of marriage, and I'd become tragically accustomed to their little theater of cruelty. The way they'd exchange knowing glances, the way they'd laugh at me, the way Olivia would join in, her beautiful face twisted into a smirk, instead of standing up for her own husband. But this time, this felt like a punch to the gut, colder and heavier than the Washington rain. My phone was still inside the car, plugged into the charger. My wallet, the pathetic little fold of cash and my only ID, tucked safely in the glove box. All I had was the faded, soaking t-shirt and jeans I was wearing, and a growing, ice-cold pit in my stomach as the minutes ticked by. We'd been on this godforsaken road trip for 3 days now, heading to Amelia's family cabin, a weather-beaten cedar fortress on the Olympic Peninsula, and I'd been miserable the whole time. Olivia had practically begged me to come, said it was a chance for me to finally bond with her crew. I'd swallow my reservations because I knew what that meant. Her friends, the Coven, as I'd secretly started calling them, always treated me like an outsider. Tossed out barbed jabs and inside jokes I wasn't privy to, all cloaked in a sugary sweet pretense of playful teasing. But I went anyway, because I loved her, or at least I had loved the ghost of the woman I thought she was, the memory of the woman I married. The gas station was a relic, an island of flickering neon in a sea of dense, dripping forest. It was perched right off the main coastal highway, Route 101, miles from any recognizable town, just a single pump and a tiny convenience store with a perpetually flickering sign that read, Ocean View Gas and Grill. I'd gone inside, needing the bathroom badly after 3 days of questionable roadside coffee. I'd figured they'd wait. They always waited. They needed me to drive the next stretch, after all, except this time, they didn't. The first hour was a blur of frantic pacing. I kicked at the cracked, moss-slicked pavement, my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept inventing scenarios. Any second now, the tires would crunch on the gravel, the silver sedan would pull a dramatic U-turn, and Olivia's voice would call out, all light and false cheer. Gotcha! You should see your face, Ethan. But the road remained a tunnel of wet silence. The only sound was the rain and the rhythmic slosh of the Puget Sound just beyond the tree line. 2 hours in, the adrenaline began to curdle into something sour and dark. The cold had seeped into my bones, and my throat was raw. I kept replaying the last few days, searching for the clue, the telltale sign I'd been too blind to see. Amelia's eyes, narrowed and glittering, when she accidentally drenched my passport with a splash of lukewarm tea. Grace, leaning close to Olivia at dinner, whispering something that made my wife giggle while shooting a quick, scornful glance my way. And Isla, who never spoke, but whose smug, unsettling little grin followed my every movement like a spotlight. I should have known. They hadn't just been teasing me. They had been building up to this. A masterwork of cruelty, and I'd been too much of a complacent fool to notice the foundation cracking beneath my feet. The silence was broken by the deep, throaty growl of an engine. A beat-up, dark green logging truck, a veritable monster of rusted metal and huge, muddy tires, pulled up to the single pump. The driver, a colossal man with a salt and pepper beard and a baseball cap stained dark with oil and rain, leaned out of the window. You look like a drowned rat, buddy. Been standing there a while. His voice was rough like ground-up stone, but surprisingly gentle. The kindness hit me like a physical blow. It was the first human emotion I'd encountered in hours, and it shattered the brittle dam of my denial. I wasn't okay. They weren't coming back. Olivia wasn't coming back. I swallowed a mouthful of the cold air, trying to keep my voice from trembling, keeping the utter panic out of my eyes. Yeah, my ride, my wife and friends. They left me. They took a detour and forgot. You think you could help? I lied, the lie feeling flimsy and transparent even to my own ears. He nodded slowly, his eyes assessing me, seeing right through the weak excuse. He'd seen a dozen variations of this story in this remote stretch of highway. Hop in. Where you headed? Nearest town is Port Angeles. It's a haul. I didn't know. Home. Back to the apartment we'd shared, to the life we'd built. But as I climbed up into the high cab, the sheer scale of the betrayal came rushing up in a hot, sickening wave. 5 years of her sidelong glances, her dismissals, her allowance of her friends treating me like a piece of garbage. It all converged in a knot of heavy rage. I stared out the window as the flickering neon sign of the gas station shrank in the side mirror, dissolving into the relentless rain. The trucker, whose name I later learned was Jack, didn't press. He just drove, the massive engine rumbling, humming a low, off-key blues riff. My hands clenched in a fist on my lap, squeezing the rain out of my jeans. I could have borrowed his phone, called Olivia, demanded an explanation, but I knew exactly what the response would be. It was a joke, Ethan. Don't be such a delicate flower, babe. I'd heard the words, the tone, the instant shift of the blame back onto me 1,000 times. Every time I complained about Amelia or Grace or Isla, Olivia would roll her eyes and accuse me of having no sense of humor. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I was too dull to appreciate their exquisite brand of mockery. But sitting there alone, abandoned like a stray dog on a back road, the truth was an agonizing clarity. They didn't get me either. And Olivia, she had picked them over me. Not just once, but for the last time. Jack dropped me off hours later, as the deep blue of the Pacific twilight was beginning to bleed into the sky. He stopped at a crossroad, pointing with a massive thumb toward a low, gray haze in the distance. Port Angeles, the town he'd mentioned. Good luck, son, he said, his voice heavy with a weary knowledge of the world. Folks don't leave people like that by accident. He didn't wait for a reply, just tipped his cap and rumbled off, disappearing into the dense cedar forest. I nodded, my throat a dry, tight knot, and started walking. My cheap sneakers squished with every step, the humid, cold air heavy on my face. No phone, no cash, no plan. Just me, the open, wet road, and the sound of the ocean, a cold reminder of the vastness of my solitude. Part of me, the old, weak, desperate part, wanted to run back, flag down the next car, beg someone to call her, to fix this gaping, horrifying hole in my life. But a new part, a stronger, colder part, kept pushing me forward toward the distant haze of the town. I was done being the punchline, done being the easy target. Olivia and her friends thought they'd won. They thought they'd finally broken me, shattered the man they deemed too soft, too earnest. But as I trudged toward Port Angeles, the gray skies mirroring the emptiness of my future, a strange, utterly profound calm settled over me. They hadn't broken me. They had set me free. I didn't know what was waiting for me in that little coastal town. I didn't know how I'd eat, where I'd sleep, or how I'd get an ID, a job, a life, with absolutely nothing but the wet clothes on my back. But for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of Olivia's judgment. I wasn't worried about Amelia's next calculated dig. I was alone, yes, profoundly and utterly alone, but I wasn't helpless. The road stretched out ahead, slick with rain, endless and empty, framed by colossal, ancient pines. And I kept walking. They'd left me behind, intended to hurt me, but their cruelty was the catalyst I never knew I needed. This was my chance to figure out who Ethan was without her, without them. By the time the single, feeble streetlight of the town's outskirts flickered into view, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going back. Not to Olivia. Not to that life. Whatever came next, it was mine to build. The streetlights of Port Angeles cast long, lonely reflections on the wet street. It was a true coastal town, weather-beaten, a little run-down, with the persistent, salty smell of the sea mixed with damp earth. I stood under the meager shelter of a bus stop, the cold still biting. My sneakers, soaked through, squished with every shift of my weight. The total weight of my assets, 0. I thought again of the gas station, The empty pavement, the sheer, brazen calculation of it. Olivia, Amelia, Isla, Grace, all of them, giggling, thinking their final act of malice was the height of comedy. I could almost hear Olivia's voice, dismissive and airy. He'll figure it out. He always does. He's so boringly responsible. Well, I was figuring it out now, just not on their terms. I found a small, Salvation Army shelter a few blocks from the waterfront. It was a sturdy, no-nonsense building, with a hand-painted sign that looked as tired as I felt. My stomach twisted with a bitter shame as I pushed through the heavy wooden door. Me, a guy with a degree, a good job back in the city, standing in a homeless shelter. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of old coffee and industrial strength cleaner. A man stood behind the counter, a mountain of a person with kind eyes and a short-cropped, graying beard. His name tag read Jack, the same name as the trucker, a strange, small coincidence that felt like a nudge from fate. Lost or just broke? He asked, his voice calm, assessing. Both, I admitted, the word tasting like ash. Ditched on the 101. No money, no ID, nothing. Jack didn't flinch. Happens. Every week, someone gets left out there. He handed me a clipboard, the paper warm from the heater. Fill this out. We'll get you a cot and a hot meal. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest. That night, lying on a thin cot in a room with a dozen snoring strangers, my mind refused to shut off. Olivia's face flashed in the darkness, a cruel, mocking specter. I wanted to hate her, to burn the image, but the ache of 5 years of shared history still pulsed. The old, familiar need to hear her voice, to beg her to say it was all a mistake. But then Jack's simple, pragmatic words cut through the emotional noise. Tomorrow we figure out the rest. The next morning, Jack sat me down with a cup of the shelter's thin coffee. He laid out the reality of my situation with cold, necessary clarity. You need ID to do anything. Job, bank, rent. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. It'll take time, but we'll start the process. In the meantime, you need cash. I felt the uselessness creeping in again. Where can I even look? No papers, no references. Jack smirked, a quick, almost tender movement of his lips. There's a local joint called the Drowned Sailor Diner. Owner's an old broad named Martha. Hard as a clamshell, but fair. Tell her I sent you. She always needs someone to scrub. The Drowned Sailor Diner was tucked away near the docks, a squat, wooden building painted a defiant, faded red. It had the authentic, gritty atmosphere of a place that fed real workers, fishermen, loggers, dockhands. Martha was behind the counter, a wiry woman in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. She was a walking tapestry of faded nautical tattoos that snaked up her surprisingly strong arms, and her voice was a throaty, perpetual growl, like the grinding of anchors. Jack says you need work, she stated, not bothering to look up from wiping down the counter with a practiced, furious energy. Yeah, I do, I replied, standing straighter, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Anything you've got. I'm a fast learner. She finally looked up, her dark eyes piercing me like drill bits. She studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment, seeing the soft, abandoned city boy underneath the wet clothes. Dishwasher quit yesterday. Call me a fascist. Pays crap. Hours are worse. You steal a single penny from me, kid, and you're dead. Start now. I blinked. No interview. No forms. Just an immediate, non-negotiable command. Okay, I'm in. She tossed a stained apron over the counter, and just like that, I was in the back, plunging my hands into a sink full of scalding, greasy water. The clatter of plates, the steam, the smell of burnt grease and old coffee. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. It was mine. No Olivia to judge the grime. No Amelia to mock my failure. Just me, the scalding water, and an endless stack of greasy dishes. Jack came by later that week, his enormous frame dwarfing the small kitchen. He helped me file the preliminary paperwork for a replacement ID, the first frustrating step in a long bureaucratic dance. You're doing all right, Ethan, he said, clapping me on the shoulder, a heavy weight of approval. I wasn't so sure, but I kept going. The shelter was a temporary home, the Drowned Sailor Diner my new, essential lifeline. I didn't try to call Olivia. I didn't even try to see if my old email address still worked. Every night, I fell asleep utterly exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. I was starting over from absolute zero, and I felt a faint, thrilling sense that maybe, just maybe, I could make this work. A new name, a new town, a new man. Part 2. The cold current of return. I woke up on that shelter cot every morning with the same familiar ache in my back, the same collective groan of the other men stirring around me. It had been weeks since Olivia and the coven ditched me in the green, suffocating silence of the forest, and the sting of the betrayal had begun to calcify. My life was a monotonous loop of scrubbing plates at Martha's diner, sleeping on a borrowed mattress, and wearing clothes from the shelter's donation bin. My hands were raw and perpetually cracked from the relentless exposure to hot water and harsh soap, but I welcomed the physical discomfort. It was a useful distraction, an anchor that kept my mind from drifting back to her, back to that soft, deceptive warmth of our old life. Jack at the shelter remained a silent, indispensable rock, helping me navigate the Byzantine mess of paperwork required to secure a replacement ID. Takes time, he'd gruffly advise, passing me another form. But you're not quitting, so you'll get there. His quiet faith felt like a priceless currency. The diner was my entire world now. Martha was a merciless taskmaster, a human buzzsaw who demanded efficiency and silence. Move faster, Ethan. We ain't running a soup kitchen back here. She'd bark from the counter, but the words had a hollow ring. I knew, with the quiet certainty that comes from hard labor, that her demands were simply her way of showing a perverse kind of respect. I worked every double shift I could get, piling up my cash in a wrinkled envelope I'd taped to the underside of my cot. My first full paycheck was a painfully small stack of bills, but it was enough to buy a cheap, prepaid phone from the corner gas station. I held the small, plastic thing in my hand, still glossy and new, and felt a surge of something ferociously proprietary. It wasn't a status symbol. It wasn't connected to a joint account. It was mine, bought with my money, earned by my own raw, tired hands. I didn't need her anymore. The thought was a quiet, revolutionary roar in my chest. Then, the call started. I'd only had the prepaid phone for a day when it buzzed in the pocket of my grease-stained apron. I was elbow-deep in suds, scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot. I wiped my hands on my apron, the anxiety a cold, sudden spike in my chest. Olivia's number. It flashed on the screen, a ghost from a life I'd torched. My stomach dropped, but my hand was steady. I let it ring, watching the screen with a weird, detached curiosity, until it clicked into voicemail. A minute later, the notification popped up. I knew I shouldn't have listened. I knew the danger of letting her voice back into my head. But the curiosity, the need to know her angle, was too great. I hit play. Her voice came through the tiny speaker, thin and tremulous, like a bad actress playing a role. Ethan, where are you? We waited for you. It was just a joke. We're so worried. Please call me back. I stood there, staring at the running water, the spray hitting my face, instantly cold. Worried? They'd left me stranded in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back. If they had waited, they would have circled back hours ago. The lie was as thick and suffocating as the coastal fog. The phone buzzed again, seconds later. Amelia. I hit play, and the tone was completely different. All casual, smug confidence. The sound of a woman who thought the world was her playground. Come on, dude. You have to admit it was hilarious. Get over yourself and call us back. All right? The cabin is boring without you. Hilarious. The word reverberated in my small, cramped space. That was it, wasn't it? That's what I was to them. A source of amusement. A punchline to be recounted over expensive wine at the coastal cabin. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white, the cheap plastic digging into my palm. More calls came after that. A dizzying flood of texts and voicemails. Olivia again, then Grace, then Amelia, their messages piling up. We miss you. Where'd you go? This isn't funny anymore, Ethan. I scrolled through them on my cot that night, the silence of the shelter amplifying the frantic tone of their messages. My chest was tight, a suffocating band of metal wrapped around my ribs. Olivia's words, the fake concern, the manufactured guilt, were a familiar poison. I listened to Amelia's message again, then one from Grace that was nothing but a high-pitched, mocking giggle before it cut off. My thumb hovered over the call button. The old me, the weak me, would have dialed Olivia, screamed at her, demanded a confession of remorse. But she'd just deploy her usual tactics, laugh it off, or cry and make me feel like the villain for bringing it up. I'd spent years swallowing their cruelty, smiling through the poison because I thought that was the quiet duty of a devoted husband. Not anymore. I went through the list: Olivia, Amelia, Isla, Grace, and began the simple, definitive act of blocking every single one. My fingers shook slightly as I did it, a last involuntary spasm of the man I used to be. But once it was done, the phone went absolutely, profoundly silent. No more buzzing. No more lies. No more manufactured guilt. I leaned back against the wall, letting out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for 5 years. It felt like cutting a heavy cable that had tethered me to a sinking ship. They couldn't reach me. They couldn't control me. They didn't get to decide how this ended. I did. The next day, I walked into the diner like a man remade. I plunged my hands into the dishwater, letting the heat burn away the last faint echoes of their voices. Martha, of course, noticed a shift. Her eyes, sharp as a gull's, caught the change in my rhythm. "You're quiet today, Ethan," she said, tossing a grease-stained rag onto the counter. "Trouble?" I shrugged, scrubbing a plate with unnecessary force. "Just sorting some stuff out. Old business." She snorted, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Long as it don't mess with my kitchen, sort of way." I managed a small, genuine smirk. She didn't care about my dramatic history. She cared about the work. It was the purest form of relationship I'd had in years. Jack came by later, handing me an official paper with a government case number. "Coming along," he said. "The wheels turn slow, but they turn. You holding up?" I nodded. "Yeah, better than I thought I would." By the end of the next month, I'd saved enough to move out of the shelter. I found a tiny, water-damaged studio apartment on the second floor of an ancient, creaking building in the town's less-traveled district. The single room had a lumpy mattress, a bathroom that required strategic maneuvering, and a window that overlooked a perpetually fog-draped parking lot. But it was mine. No more cots. No more snoring strangers. Just a key in my pocket and a door I could lock. Martha, seeing my dedication, bumped me up to prep cook. More hours, more cash, and the smell of onions and garlic instead of stale water. I'd chop and peel in the back, the repetitive, rhythmic motion of the knife, a simple, grounding meditation. The nights were still tough, a cold, dark current of loneliness. I'd lie on that squeaky mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and the phantom of Olivia would creep back. I'd see her soft, genuine smile, the one she used to give me before her friends warped her, and I'd wonder what she was doing. If she missed me, if she had an ounce of regret. The loneliness was a heavy, cold weight. But the sun would eventually rise, and I'd drag myself out of bed, pull on my apron, and head to the diner. No fear of her judgment. No cruel, cutting remarks from her circle. Just me, free to breathe, free to be. One night, bored and restless, I gave in to a terrible impulse. I kept my prepaid phone clean, with no ties to the past. But the curiosity, the morbid need to see the narrative she was spinning, was a physical itch. I created a burner social media account, a random, unidentifiable profile, and looked her up. Olivia's profile was still public, a nauseating gallery of her perfect, curated life. Photos from the infamous lake house trip. Her and Amelia, impossibly sun-kissed, posing by the water. Grace, holding a cocktail. And then I saw it. The post about me. It was a photo of us from years ago, smiling at some forgettable family picnic. And the caption was a dagger of pure, cynical manipulation. "Missing my love. I pray he find his way back to me. It's been so long since he left." I stared at it, the thumb hovering over the screen. Missing me? She hadn't left me. She had abandoned me, driven off, and left me to rot in the cold. I almost laughed out loud in that dingy apartment, the sound of dry, bitter gasp. It was so transparently fake. So Olivia, casting herself as the victim, the grieving, patient wife whose husband had simply wandered off instead of being a conscious casualty of her malicious abandonment. I scrolled through the comments. Amelia, he'll turn up, live, don't worry. He's probably just sulking. Grace, sending you all my strength, honey. You're so brave. My stomach churned, a profound, sickening wave of disgust. They were all in on it, all playing the game, painting me as the villain, The unstable husband who had simply up and left his perfect wife. I tossed the phone onto the mattress, running my hands through my hair. She hadn't changed. None of them had. But I had. I wasn't the grinning fool in that picnic photo anymore. I was someone else. Someone forged in the fire of betrayal and the cold reality of the Port Angeles docks. The next day at the diner, I was quieter than usual, still chewing on the bitter taste of her performance. Martha, ever the observer, slid a plate of fresh fries my way. "You look like you got gut punched," she rasped. "That ex of yours." I froze, surprised by her accuracy. I'd never given her the full story, just vague outlines. "Yeah," I admitted. "Saw something online. She's acting like she's the one who was hurt." Martha snorted, the sound loud and sharp over the clatter of the kitchen. "Sounds like a real piece of work, kid. Good riddance." I nodded, forcing a small smile. She was right. Good riddance. Work became my sanctuary. I'd dice vegetables, help the line cook flip burgers, and wipe down counters. Anything to keep moving, to keep my hands busy. The regulars. The old fisherman who always ordered his coffee black as oil. The chatty waitress who'd give me stock tips. Nodded and waved. A quiet acknowledgement that I was now part of the fabric of this strange, gray town. My hands were calloused and rough now, my arms stronger from hauling crates. I'd catch my reflection in the diner's front window. Tired eyes, messy hair, but a man who was making it. One day at a time. Olivia's post faded. I stopped checking her profile. It didn't matter where she was spinning. I had my key, my paycheck, my life. It was small, but it was growing. The loneliness still lingered, especially on those deep, fog-ridden nights, but it was no longer a crippling weight. I'd wake up to the sound of the seagulls, pull on my work boots, and head out into the cold, damp morning air. No one was waiting to mock me. No one was rolling their eyes. I could simply be Ethan. Plain, simple Ethan. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Part 3. Anchoring the new life. I'd been living above the old fisherman's supply store, a slight upgrade from the water-damaged studio, for nearly a year now, settling into a rhythm that finally felt less like survival and more like belonging. Work at the Drowned Sailor was my anchor, steady, predictable, and demanding. I was saving my cash, slowly building up a small, solid reserve. The days were a blur of steam, sizzling fat, and Martha's endless, gruff commentary. But even her flinty heart seemed to be thawing slightly. She'd stopped calling me kid, and started using my name, Ethan, a quiet concession that felt like a medal. Then she walked in. Sophia. She started frequenting Martha's diner about 9 months after I took over the prep station. Always in the same booth, the one by the foggy window that offered a glimpse of the docks. Always with an intimidating stack of textbooks and a pen tucked behind her ear. I quickly pegged her as a medical student from the nearby community college, given the way she'd occasionally mouth dense anatomical terms while furiously scribbling notes. Her order was a ritual: Denver omelet, no tomatoes, extra large black coffee. And she'd barely look up when I brought it over, her focus absolute. I don't know exactly when I started the routine. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I missed the subtle, complex art of interaction that didn't involve being mocked. Or maybe I just wanted to see if I could make her crack that serious, studious exterior. I started swapping out my name tag every day. I'd use Sharpie masking tape and stick it to my apron. One day I was Rusty, the next a bland Steve, then a truly ridiculous Barnaby. She didn't notice at first, too deeply immersed in the world of histology slides and pharmaceutical dosages. But one rainy Tuesday, I walked over to refill her coffee, wearing the name Cletus pinned prominently on my chest. She finally looked up. Her eyes, an intense, searching green, narrowed slightly. They flicked from the name tag, lingered for a long second, and then returned to my face. "Your name tag is incorrect," she stated, her voice quiet but possessing an absolute certainty, like a doctor delivering a precise diagnosis. I grinned, a genuine, spontaneous smile that felt rusty and unfamiliar. "Is it?" I shot back, keeping my voice low, leaning against the edge of the booth. My real name was Ethan, but she hadn't asked, and I liked the game. A slow, subtle smirk touched the corner of her mouth. A small, intelligent flicker of amusement. She didn't offer a name tag of her own. She just went back to her notes. That was it. Our first real moment. and I carried the memory of that smirk around like a secret weapon. Sophia became the unofficial highlight of my week. I'd find increasingly flimsy excuses to swing by her table. A coffee refill when her cup was still half full, a lingering wipe of the table edge, a faux-concerned question about whether the omelet was cooked to her satisfaction. She'd usually nod, mumble a quick thanks, but that subtle, challenging smirk stayed lodged in my head. One evening, she came in looking utterly defeated. Her usual sleek ponytail was messy, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and the books she was hauling looked heavy enough to break her shoulder. Rough night in the anatomy lab, I asked, setting her coffee down with extra care. She sighed, a tired, deep sound, rubbing her eyes with the heel of her hand. Exams. I haven't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. I think my brain is actively shutting down. I nodded, not pushing for a conversation, but understanding the brutal intensity of her stress. When I brought her food, I slipped an extra, perfect portion of crispy hash browns on her plate when her head was bowed low over a diagram of the circulatory system. She noticed. She glanced up at the plate, then up at me, a flicker of genuine surprise replacing the exhaustion. "You're sneaky," she accused, a faint smile spreading across her face. I just shrugged, picking up a rag to wipe down a neighboring salt shaker. Got to keep the future doctors of America awake somehow. The following week, our first real date happened almost by accident. She came into the diner late one Friday evening, not in her usual study uniform, but dressed in smart dark jeans and a nice, tailored navy top. She looked up from the menu and found me stacking clean cups behind the counter. "My friends," she announced, the word laced with tired sarcasm, "just bailed on a reservation at that new artisanal pizza place downtown. They canceled over a text message. I'm not wasting a perfectly good night and a reservation slot." She paused, her green eyes fixing on mine. "You free, Ethan?" The use of my actual name, spoken with a slight emphasis that acknowledged the ridiculous name tag game, made my heart skip a beat. My shift was technically over, but Martha was still counting the register, her back to us. "Go on, boy," she barked without turning around. "You're making the rest of us look bad moping around. You earned it." So I went. We drove in her beat-up Honda Civic, a car crammed with textbooks and empty coffee mugs, to the trendy pizza place. We split a pepperoni and mushroom pizza and a pitcher of terrible, fizzy soda, and we talked for hours. She laughed, truly threw her head back and laughed, when I told her the entire, embarrassing saga of the name tags. "I knew Cletus wasn't your name," she admitted, her eyes bright with unshed tears of laughter. "I was waiting for you to get to Bartholomew before I said anything." We talked about everything: the brutal demands of her med school curriculum, the simple satisfaction of my diner gig, the sheer, beautiful ridiculousness of the town. It was easy. It was natural. It was as if a deep, underlying tension I hadn't realized I carried had simply dissolved. 6 months later, she moved into my cramped studio above the supply store. It was cramped. Her enormous, intimidating textbooks instantly colonized every flat surface, forcing me to build makeshift shelves out of crates. We'd trip over each other constantly, attempting to cook a meal on the tiny, smoking hot plate. But I didn't care. The small space was filled with her focused energy. She'd study late into the night, the cone of light from her desk lamp glowing softly while I slept, and I'd often wake up to hear her muttering complex diagnostic terms in her sleep. It was the most strangely comforting sound I'd ever known. A year after that, we moved into a real apartment, a proper space with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a thrift store couch that didn't smell faintly of bleach and old fish. Sophia was fundamentally different from Olivia. She didn't mock me. She didn't make me feel small. When I doubt myself, which I still did, often, the old self-loathing a stubborn ghost, she'd simply look at me with those steady green eyes and say, "You've got this, Ethan. You build a whole life out of a bus stop. You're unstoppable." And somehow, with her saying it, I believe her. We'd cook together, watch old, grainy reruns on the small TV, and argue playfully over whose turn it was to tackle the dishes. It was simple. It was unvarnished. It was ours. Meanwhile, the ghost of Olivia wouldn't completely leave me alone. The email started again. She'd somehow found my new, post-ID email address, probably trawling through some old, shared utility bill or an obsolete social media account. The first one came a few weeks after Sophia moved in, popping up on my new, slightly better phone while I was back at the diner, meticulously chopping onions for the afternoon shift. "Ethan, I just want to know you're safe. I miss you. We all do. We made a terrible mistake. Please, just reply." I stare at the screen, my knife hovering over the cutting board. A half-chopped onion, suddenly irrelevant. Miss me? She'd left me on the side of a highway, laughed about it with her friends, and now she missed me? I deleted it instantly, without a reply. More followed. Some short, some long, all of them sickly sweet, dripping with that artificial concern she wielded like a weapon. "I messed up, I know I did. Please talk to me. I saw your grandma. She asked about you. She's worried." She was pulling out the big guns now, using my sweet, frail grandmother as a guilt trip. I'd read them, feel that cold, familiar knot of pain in my chest, and then, with a simple swipe, hit delete. Sophia caught me once, frowning at the phone in my hand. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Nobody," I said, putting the phone down, pushing the old life away. She didn't press. She didn't need to. She trusted me. And that simple, quiet trust was the antidote to years of Olivia's manipulation. I wasn't going back. Life with Sophia was a quiet, steady kind of good, far better than anything I'd ever thought I deserved. The diner was humming, my hands were steady, and Olivia's persistent emails were just noise, an irrelevant hum I could easily tune out. I had built something new, something solid, something real, and every day with Sophia was proof of its strength. She'd tease me about my overly salted chili, I'd laugh at her profoundly terrible singing voice, and we'd fall asleep, tangled together, on that secondhand couch. Olivia could write all the manipulative emails she wanted. I didn't owe her a single second of my attention. My world was here now, anchored securely in Port Angeles, with Sophia by my side, and I wasn't letting go. I finally understood that freedom wasn't loud or flashy. It was a small key in my pocket, a reliable paycheck, and the absolute choice to be who I was, without apology. Part 4. The Price of Stability. I stood in the stainless steel kitchen of the Drowned Sailor Diner. The heat from the grill, a comfortable shield against the damp outside air. I was expertly flipping a massive stack of pancakes, a skill I'd acquired through sheer, bloody-minded repetition. The sizzle filling the early morning silence. Things weren't just steady now. They were accelerating. Sophia and I were married. A quiet, small ceremony on the docks with Martha and Jack serving as our witnesses, followed by a celebratory meal of the diner's finest clam chowder. We'd moved again, this time into a small, charming house on the quieter outskirts of town, complete with a perpetually overgrown garden and a porch swing. Life felt solid, concrete, a world away from the fragile, hollow existence Olivia had left me with at that rainy gas station. I'd been at the diner long enough that Martha had completely shed her gruff exterior, showing me a strange, almost maternal pride. She'd started leaning on me for real decisions, not just daily operational tasks, but financial ones, nodding more and barking almost never when I got things done right. One Tuesday morning, during a rare lull between the breakfast and lunch rush, she called me over to the counter, her sharp, tattooed eyes holding a serious weight. "Ethan," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, her voice devoid of any pretense. "You're not half bad at this, kid. You're better than I was at your age." I smirked, expecting a follow-up joke about my cooking, but her face remained fixed. "I'm opening a second location, up near the highway junction, towards Forks. Not a diner, a lunch counter. Smaller joint, more takeout. I need someone to run it. Fully. Kitchen, staff, ordering, the whole mess. You in?" I froze, the spatula suddenly heavy and awkward in my hand, the pancakes sizzling forgotten on the grill. Me, run a whole restaurant. I'd clawed my way up from scrubbing industrial pots to flipping eggs, but managing an entire, independent operation, it felt too big, too sudden, too much like the kind of opportunity one was conditioned to believe I didn't deserve. "You serious, Martha?" I managed, my voice rough with disbelief. She snorted, a deep, resonant sound in her chest. "Do I look like I waste good food or good time on jokes, Ethan? You got the head for it. You work hard, you don't complain, and you fix problems instead of whining about him. Say yes or no. The lease is signed." My head swam. A few years ago, I'd been a non-entity, abandoned with zero prospects. Now this, I felt a familiar, old fear prickle the back of my neck. The irrational conviction that this was some elaborate, cruel trick, an echo of Olivia's pranks, waiting for me to fail spectacularly. That night, I sat on our porch swing, the damp night air smelling of pine and salt. Sophia came out, dropping a heavy textbook onto the small table, and saw the look on my face. "You look like you just got off for the moon and decided it was made of cheese," she noted, sitting beside me, her elbow bumping mine. "What's up?" I told her about Martha's offer, my voice low and hesitant, as if voicing the ambition might cause the entire world to collapse. She wants me to run her new place. Manager. Everything in my hands. Sophia didn't hesitate. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She went straight to the heart of the matter. "And you're terrified you're gonna mess it up, so you're thinking about saying no," she said, her voice a flat statement of fact. I rubbed the back of my neck. What if I do screw it up, Soph? What if I'm not actually capable of this kind of responsibility? She turned to me, her green eyes sharp and unwavering in the twilight. She took my hand, her grip firm and warm. "You were running that diner from the inside months ago, Ethan. You handle the staff, you fix the broken fryer, you manage the stock while Martha plays accountant. You're already doing it. Just put the title on it. You've got this. If you can walk away from nothing and build everything you have here, you can handle a lunch counter." Her words weren't sweet. They were armor. They were the complete rejection of the self-doubt Olivia had spent 5 years nurturing in me. Olivia would have laughed. Amelia would have suggested I hire a tutor. But Sophia simply looked at me, steady and sure, and saw a capable man. I nodded, the fear shrinking. "Okay, I'll do it." She smiled, a quiet, satisfied curve of her mouth. "Good. Now give me a beer from the fridge." Celebrating. I laughed, a warm, genuine sound, and the last of the fear vanished. The next day, I told Martha yes. She merely grunted, handed me a huge, heavy ring of keys, and said, "Don't burn it down, Ethan." The second location was a tiny, rickety storefront, barely big enough for 10 people. But it was mine to command. I threw myself into the chaos, setting up the systems, interviewing 2 new servers, ordering supplies, and cooking when the line got slammed. It was a disaster at first. The coffee machine broke, I underordered the clams, and the servers almost quit on the first Friday. But I figured it out. I fixed the coffee, drove 2 hours to get emergency supplies, and convinced the servers to stay with a genuine apology and an extra $50. Sophia was right. I'd already been training for this, just without the official weight of the title. The place started to find its rhythm. Locals trickled in, truckers made it a regular stop, and the tiny lunch counter became a small, thriving part of the town's economy. Martha even stopped by once, sitting in a booth and drinking an entire cup of coffee without complaining. "Not bad, Ethan," she'd rasped before leaving. Highest praise imaginable. It was 3 months into my new role, sitting in the cramped office of the new counter, checking inventory on my work phone, when the notification popped up. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a call. It was LinkedIn. My stomach clenched, the old, cold reflex of fear seizing me. "Someone viewed your profile 27 times today." I stared at the number. 27. That wasn't a recruiter. That wasn't a mistake. That was obsessive. I tapped the notification, my thumb shaking slightly against the screen, and there she was. Olivia. Her name, impossibly, was tied to some generic consulting firm. She was digging. She'd been tracking me down, sifting through the sparse, publicly available details of my life. I gripped the counter, trying to steady the sudden, heavy thumping of my heart. Years of silence, of building a fortress, and she was back, creeping in like a vine through the cracks. What did she want? Why now after all this time? I quickly clicked on the profile. Olivia was older, her short blonde hair giving her a sharp, corporate look, her smile tight and performed. She was a consultant. I didn't dare read her endorsements. I looked away, stepping into the tiny storeroom, inhaling the dry, comforting smell of flour and canned goods. 15 years had passed. 2 diners, a wife, a home, a life built entirely from the detritus she'd left me. And she could still reduce me to this, a panicked man leaning against a shelf of pickles. I hated that she still held that power. I had worked so hard to bury the memory of the gas station, the scorn, the emotional starvation. Was she jealous? Desperate? Was she finally seeing the man she abandoned wasn't the broken boy she'd expected? I paced the cramped space, running my hands through my hair. The old, weak voice whispered, "Message her, ask what she wants." But I slammed the door on that thought. That was the trap. Her entire life was built on demanding attention, on forcing the world to acknowledge her existence. I wasn't giving her the leverage. I went back to the kitchen, throwing myself into the heat and the organized chaos. Coffee needed brewing. A staff meeting was due. I cooked, poured, reconciled the cash register. The regulars nodded. The servers called out orders. And I kept moving. But Olivia lingered. Those 27 views. A silent, digital surveillance. I didn't tell Sophia that night. She was at the dining room table, grading papers. The smell of sterile paperwork and fresh ink mixing with the smell of the pot roast I was making. "Busy day?" she asked, glancing up, her glasses low on her nose. "Yeah." I lied easily, forcing a steady smile, kissing the top of her head. Same old, same old. Just ordering new spatulas." She handed me a pile of clean socks to fold, and I sat, folding, the domestic routine a heavy, comforting blanket. Our son, Ethan Jr., was upstairs, reading quietly. Our daughter, Isla, named after the kind trucker's wife, not the girl from the coven, was drawing on the floor. Laughter, books, the simple weight of a clean sock. I was here. She was out there, reduced to a digital stalker. I didn't check LinkedIn again. I didn't need to. 27 was enough. I helped Sophia with the dishes, our hips bumping together at the sink, and I slowly let the panic drain away. My life was here. It was mine. It was real. The next morning, I was at the first diner, pouring coffee for old man Tom, when my phone buzzed again, this time a generic text notification. I didn't look. I shoved it deep into my pocket. Whatever it was, whatever game she was playing, I wasn't biting. Not yet. I spent the day focused, grill, counter, cash register, keeping my hands moving, my voice steady, my eyes straight ahead. She was a shadow, a distant, irrelevant hum. I had spent 15 years building this wall, and it wasn't coming down for a single LinkedIn notification. I was here, standing tall, and she was stuck looking in. Part 5. The Check and the Reckoning. The door of the Drowned Sailor Diner jingled, and I felt the cold air rush in. Not the normal blast of damp Puget Sound wind, but a wave of sick, familiar energy. I was in the kitchen of the original diner, talking to Martha about a supply issue, when I heard the low murmur of voices. 3 distinct voices, 3 high-pitched laughs that scraped against the inside of my skull. It was 3 days after those LinkedIn alerts. I had been waiting in a state of coiled, cold readiness for something like this. I wiped my hands on my apron, the smell of pancakes and coffee suddenly irrelevant. I knew, before I even saw them, who it was: Olivia, Amelia, and Isla. I walked to the pass-through window and looked out into the dining area. The breakfast rush was long over, leaving only a few faithful regulars nursing their 3rd cup of coffee. And there they were. 15 years had done a number on them, too. Olivia's hair was short and severe, her face lined with a hard, unfamiliar bitterness. Amelia still had that aggressive, entitled swagger, but it looked forced, now brittle. Isla, the quietest and most toxic of the coven, was hunched in the booth, looking like she wanted the red vinyl to swallow her whole. They spotted me at the window, and a hush fell over their table. Olivia's eyes went wide, her mouth falling open in a clumsy, unpracticed mask of shock. "Oh my God," she whispered, the sound thin and theatrical. "It's really you." Amelia leaned back, her elbow hooked over the back of the booth, and offered the trademark smirk, a gesture that used to make me shrink. "Well, look at the big shot, the diner mogul. You found your feet. Huh, Ethan?" Isla merely glanced up, her eyes flicking to mine, then immediately down to the frayed paper menu she was twisting in her hands. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I let the silence hang, heavy and final, like a guillotine blade. I was standing in my territory, forged by my own resilience. They were the invaders. I picked up the industrial steel coffee pot, a heavy, reassuring weight, and walked over to their table. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting the pleasantries, my voice low, steady, and utterly flat. I sounded like Martha. Olivia shifted, leaning forward, her hands clasped together like she was about to pray. "Ethan, please, can we just talk? Privately." I set the coffee pot down, keeping my posture rigid. "You have 15 years of silence and 27 LinkedIn views. You're here. Talk." It spilled out, messy and pathetic. Olivia's life had collapsed. Her consulting firm, the one on the profile, had gone under, taking her marriage to some high-finance guy with it. She was broke, her trust fund long spent, her options exhausted. I know what we did was unforgivable, Ethan," she stammered, the tears finally starting to well up, perfectly timed, perfectly deployed. "But we are desperate. I saw you, your success, and I just thought you'd understand." Amelia, impatient with the victim act, jumped in, her voice all false camaraderie. "Look, dude, you've got 3 diners now. That's solid. We just need a little bridge loan. Just a hand up, you know? For old time's sake. We'll pay you back. 10 grand. That's pocket change to a guy like you now." Isla, eyes still downcast, managed a low, almost inaudible sound of agreement. "Just a little help." I listened, letting the sound of their utter destitution wash over me. The sob story, the aggressive demand, the pathetic nod from Isla. They had calculated this whole encounter, tracked me down, performed the penitent act, and assumed the old, weak Ethan, the one who would always forgive, always pay, always endure, would cave. I stood there, the warm metal of the coffee pot still in my hand, watching them. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. They wanted to harvest the fruits of the life I had built after they tried to destroy me. I turned away abruptly. "Wait here." I walked back to the small, cramped office, shutting the door quietly behind me. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear, crystallizing anger that had taken 15 years to ripen. I could throw them out. I could call the cops, but that would be loud, messy, incomplete. I sat down at my desk, pulled out my checkbook, the one with the logo of Ethan's Diner Group, and wrote a check. I made the numbers precise. I made the memo specific. I returned to the dining room. They snapped their heads up, their eyes wide with avarice and relief. Olivia's face was wet with theatrical tears, anticipating the large, life-saving number. I didn't say a word. I simply dropped the sealed, white envelope directly in front of Olivia, letting it land with a soft, definitive thud. Her fingers, adorned with cheap, flashy rings that were clearly knockoffs, snatched it up immediately. Her eyes scanned the contents, and the practiced, hopeful smile froze, then crumbled completely. She opened the check further, staring at the amount, and her breath hitched. A genuine gasp this time, not a practiced sob. Amelia grabbed the check from her, her face darkening with confusion that quickly curdled into pure rage. She read the amount, then the memo line. $73.50. And in the memo, written in my tight, clean script, bus fare, Grand Junction, Colorado to Port Angeles, Washington, circa 2010. What the hell is this, Ethan? Amelia spat, shoving the check at me across the table. Her voice was too loud, drawing the attention of the remaining regulars. Are you serious? $73.50? We asked for $10,000. This is pathetic. I leaned in, my voice so low, so steady, it was almost a whisper, yet it cut through the noise of the diner like a glass shard. That, I said, pointing a finger at the check, is the exact cost of a Greyhound ticket from where you left me to where I started over. You wanted me to pay for my own exit from your life. And I did. You don't get a penny more than that. Olivia was silent, her face a mask of pasty white shock. Her tears were gone, replaced by a horrified disbelief. Amelia stood up, knocking the table slightly. You are a cruel, heartless jerk. After all we've been through. I stood my ground, my eyes locked on hers. We've been through nothing but your calculated cruelty. You came here begging me to save you, playing the victim. I'm not a bank, Amelia. I'm not your safety net, and I am not your punchline anymore. Isla finally spoke, her voice shaking, barely audible. We just need a place to stay, Ethan. One night. The shelter is a few blocks over. I replied, my voice hard and flat. Jack will get you a cot. Tell him Ethan from the diner sent you. You'll figure out the rest tomorrow. You always do." I looked at Olivia one last time, my eyes conveying the absolute finality of my decision. The old emotion, the desperate ache for her approval, was dead. Only the clean, cold satisfaction of closure remained. "Get out of my diner," I commanded, loud enough for Martha, who was watching from the kitchen entrance, to hear. "And if I ever see any of you in Port Angeles again, I will call the police and file a restraining order." I turned my back and walked to the counter, grabbing a fresh rag. I wiped the polished steel, letting the physical action ground me. They sat there for a minute longer, stunned into immobility. Then, Amelia hissed something at Olivia. Olivia shoved the crumpled check in her purse like it was a live grenade, and Isla scurried out the door first. The door jingled, and then the space where they stood was empty. The diner immediately returned to its routine. The low clatter of forks, the hum of the coffee machine, the rhythmic flow of normal, honest life. I poured myself a cup of fresh coffee. It was bitter and strong, and I didn't sweeten it. They had come for my forgiveness, for my money, for the illusion of my weakness. And I had given them a precise, calculated dose of reality. It wasn't loud revenge. It was far better. It was the sweet, cold taste of self-possession. I finished my shift, locked up, and drove home to the house Sophia and I owned. As I stepped onto the porch, the scent of her dinner, a simple, good smell, met me. The sound of our children's laughter floated down from upstairs. I walked in, kissed Sophia, and helped my son with his homework. I didn't even mention the visit. They were gone. Really, truly gone. And their final act of seeking help only served to prove the absolute strength of the life I had built without them. The last ghost had been laid to rest.